Joy friends, welcome back to the Joyful House. My name is Cynthia with Cynthia's Joyful Creations, and thank you for joining me today for Once Upon a Storybook as we continue to read Anne of Avonlea. And today we are going to be reading chapters 10, Davy in Search of a Sensation, and chapter 11, Facts and Fancies. So if you will, sit back and enjoy chapter 10, Davy in Search of a Sensation. Anne, walking home from school through the birch path one November afternoon, felt convinced afresh that life was a very wonderful thing. The day had been a good day, and all had gone well in her little kingdom. St. Clair Donnell had not fought any of the other boys over the question of his name. Prillie Rogerson's face had been so puffed up from the effects of toothache that she did not once try to coquet with the boys in her vicinity. Barbara Shaw had met with only one accident, spilling a dipper of water over the floor, and Anthony Pye had not been in school at all. "What a nice month this November has been," said Anne, who had never quite gotten over her childish habit of talking to herself. November is usually such a disagreeable month, as if the year had suddenly found out that she was growing old and could do nothing but weep and fret over it. This year is growing old gracefully, just like a stately old lady who knows she can be charming even with gray hair and wrinkles. We've had lovely days and delicious twilights. This last fortnight has been so peaceful, and even Davy has been almost well behaved. I really think he is improving a great deal. How quiet the woods are today. Not a murmur except that soft wind purring in the treetops. It sounds like surf on a faraway shore. How dear the woods are, you beautiful trees. I love every one of you as a friend." Anne paused to throw her arm around a slim young birch and kiss its cream-white trunk. Diana, rounding a curve in the path, saw her and laughed. "Anne Shirley, you're only pretending to be grown up. I believe when you're alone, you're as much a little girl as you ever were." "Well, one can't get over the habit of being a little girl all at once," said Anne gaily. "You see, I was little for 14 years, and I've only been grown uppish for scarcely 3. I'm sure I shall always feel like a child in the woods. These walks home from school are almost the only time I have for dreaming, except the half hour or so before I go to sleep. I'm so busy with teaching and studying and helping Marilla with the twins that I haven't another moment for imagining things. You don't know what splendid adventures I have for a little while after I go to bed in the east gable every night. I always imagine I'm something very brilliant and triumphant and splendid, a great prima donna or a Red Cross nurse or a queen. Last night, I was a queen. You have all the fun of it without any of the inconveniences, and you can stop being a queen whenever you want to, which you couldn't in real life. But here in the woods, I like best to imagine quite different things. I'm a dryad living in an old pine, or a little brown wood elf hiding under a crinkled leaf. The witch birch you caught me kissing is a sister of mine. The only difference is she's a tree and I'm a girl. There's no real difference. Where are you going, Diana?" "Down to the Dickinsons. I promised to help Alberta cut out her new dress. Can't you walk in the evening, Anne, and come home with me?" "I might, since Fred Wright is away in town," said Anne with a rather too innocent face. Diana blushed, tossed her head, and walked on. She did not look offended, however. Anne fully intended to go down to the Dickinsons that evening, but she did not. When she arrived at Green Gables, she found a state of affairs which banished every other thought from her mind. Marilla met her in the yard, a wide-eyed Marilla. "Anne, Dora is lost." "Dora lost?" Anne looked at Davy, who was swinging on the yard gate, and detected merriment in his eyes. "Davy, do you know where she is?" "No, I don't," said Davy stoutly. "I haven't seen her since dinner time. Cross my heart." I've been away ever since 1 o'clock, said Marilla. Thomas Lynn took sick all of a sudden, and Rachel sent up for me to go at once. When I left here, Dora was playing with her doll in the kitchen, and Davy was making mud pies behind the barn. I only got home half an hour ago, and no Dora to be seen. Davy declares he never saw her since I left. Neither I did, avowed Davy solemnly. She must be somewhere around, said Anne. She would never wander far away alone. You know how timid she is. Perhaps she's fallen asleep in one of the rooms. Marilla shook her head. I've hunted the whole house through, but she may be in some of the buildings. A thorough search followed, and every corner of house, yard, and outbuildings was ransacked by those two distracted people. Anne roved the orchards and the haunted wood, calling Dora's name. Marilla took a candle and explored the cellar. Davy accompanied each of them in turn and was fertile in thinking of places where Dora could possibly be. Finally, they met again in the yard. It's a most mysterious thing, groaned Marilla. Where can she be? Said Anne miserably. Maybe she's tumbled into the well, suggested Davy cheerfully. Anne and Marilla looked fearfully into each other's eyes. The thought had been with them both through their entire search, but neither had dared to put it into words. She might have, whispered Marilla. Anne, feeling faint and sick, went to the well box and peered over. The bucket sat on the shelf inside. Far down below was a tiny glimmer of still water. The Cuthbert well was the deepest in Avonlea. If Dora, but Anne could not face the idea. She shuddered and turned away. Run across for Mr. Harrison, said Marilla, wringing her hands. Mr. Harrison and John Henry are both away. They went to town today. I'll go for Mr. Barry. Mr. Barry came back with Anne, carrying a coil of rope to which was attached a claw-like instrument that had been the business end of a grabbing fork. Marilla and Anne stood by, cold and shaken with horror and dread, while Mr. Barry dragged the well, and Davy, astride the gate, watched the group with a face indicative of huge enjoyment. Finally, Mr. Barry shook his head with a relieved air. She can't be down there. It's a mighty curious thing where she could have got to, though. Look here, young man. Are you sure you have no idea where your sister is? I've told you a dozen times that I haven't, said Davy, with an injured air. Maybe a tramp came and stole her. Nonsense, said Marilla sharply, relieved from her horrible fear of the well. And do you suppose she could have strayed over to Mr. Harrison's? She's always been talking about his parrot ever since that time you took her over. I can't believe Dora would venture so far alone, but I'll go over and see, said Anne. Nobody was looking at Davy just then, or it would have been seen that a very decided change came over his face. He quietly slipped off the gate and ran as fast as his fat legs could carry him to the barn. Anne hastened across the fields to the Harrison establishment in no very hopeful frame of mind. The house was locked, the window shades were down, and there was no sign of anything living about the place. She stood on the veranda and called Dora loudly. Ginger, in the kitchen behind her, shrieked and swore with sudden fierceness, but between his outbursts Anne heard a plaintive cry from the little building in the yard which served Mr. Harrison as a tool house. Anne flew to the door, unhasped it, and caught up a small mortal with a tear-stained face who was sitting forlornly on an upturned nail keg. "Oh, Dora, Dora, what a fright you've given us! How came you to be here?" "Davy and I came over to see Ginger," sobbed Dora. "But we couldn't see him after all, only Davy made him swear by kicking the door. And then Davy brought me here and run out and shut the door, and I couldn't get out. I cried and I cried. I was so frightened, and oh, I'm so hungry and cold. I thought you'd never come, Anne." Davy. But Anne could say no more. She carried Dora home with a heavy heart. Her joy at finding the child safe and sound was drowned out in the pain caused by Davy's behavior. The freak of shutting Dora up might easily have been pardoned, but Davy had told falsehoods, downright, cold-blooded falsehoods about it. That was the ugly fact, and Anne could not shut her eyes to it. She could have sat down and cried with sheer disappointment. She had grown to love Davy dearly, how dearly she had not known until this minute, and it hurt her unbearably to discover that he was guilty of deliberate falsehood. Marilla listened to Anne's tale in a silence that boded no good. Davy Ward. Mr. Barry laughed and advised that Davy be summarily dealt with. When he had gone home, Anne soothed and warmed the sobbing, shivering Dora, got her supper, and put her to bed. Then she returned to the kitchen just as Marilla came grimly in, leading, or rather pulling, the reluctant, cobwebby Davy, whom she had found hidden away in the darkest corner of the stable. She jerked him to the mat on the middle of the floor and then went and sat down by the east window. Anne was simply sitting limply by the west window. Between them stood the culprit. His back was toward Marilla, and it was a meek, subdued, frightened back. But his face was toward Anne, and although it was a little shame-face, there was a gleam of comradeship in Davy's eyes, as if he knew he had done wrong and was going to be punished for it, but could count on a laugh over it all with Anne later on. But no half-hidden smile answered him in Anne's gray eyes, as there might have done had it been only a question of mischief. There was something else, something ugly and repulsive. "How could you behave so, Davy?" she asked sorrowfully. Davy squirmed uncomfortably. "I just did it for fun. Things have been so awful quiet here for so long that I thought it would be fun to give you folks a big scare." It was, too. In spite of fear and a little remorse, Davy grinned over the recollection. "But you told a falsehood about it, Davy," said Anne more sorrowfully than ever. Davy looked puzzled. "What's a falsehood? Do you mean a whopper?" "I mean a story that was not true." "Course I did," said Davy frankly. "If I hadn't, you would have been scared. I had to tell it." Anne was feeling the reaction from her fright and exertions. Davy's impotent attitude gave the finishing touch. 2 big tears brimmed up in her eyes. "Oh, Davy, how could you?" she said with a quiver in her voice. "Don't you know how wrong it was?" Davy was aghast. Anne crying. He had made Anne cry. A flood of real remorse rolled like a wave over his warm little heart and engulfed it. He rushed to Anne, hurled himself into her lap, flung his arms around her neck, and burst into tears. "I didn't know it was wrong to tell whoppers," he sobbed. "How did you expect me to know it was wrong? All Mr. Sprott's children told them regular every day and crossed their hearts too. I suppose Paul Irving never tells whoppers, and here I've been trying awful hard to be as good as him. But now, I suppose you'll never love me again. But I think you might have told me it was wrong. I'm awful sorry I made you cry, Anne. I'll never tell a whopper again." Davy buried his face in Anne's shoulder and cried stormily. Anne, in a sudden glad flash of understanding, held him tight and looked over his curly thatch at Marilla. "He didn't know it was wrong to tell falsehoods, Marilla. I think we must forgive him for that part of it this time, if he'll promise never to say what isn't true again." "I never will, now that I know it's bad," aspirated Davy between sobs. "If you ever catch me telling a whopper again, you can—" Davy groped mentally for a suitable penance. "You can skin me alive, Anne." "Don't say whopper, Davy. Say falsehood," said the schoolma'am. "Why?" queried Davy, settling comfortably down and looking up with a tear-stained, investigating face. "Why ain't whopper as good as falsehood? I want to know. It's just as big a word." "It's slang, and it's wrong for little boys to use slang." "There's an awful lot of things it's wrong to do," said Davy with a sigh. "I never supposed there were so many. I'm sorry. It's wrong to tell falsehoods, 'cause it's awful handy, but since it is, I'm never going to tell any more. What are you going to do to me for telling them this time? I want to know, Anne." Anne looked beseechingly at Marilla. "I don't want to be too hard on the child," said Marilla. "I dare say nobody ever did tell him it was wrong to tell lies, and those Sprott children were no fit companions for him. Poor Mary was too sick to train him properly, and I presume you couldn't expect a 6-year-old child to know things like that by instinct. I suppose we'll just have to assume he doesn't know anything right and begin at the beginning. But he'll have to be punished for shutting Dora up, and I can't think of any way except to send him to bed without his supper, and we've done that so often. Can't you suggest something else, Anne? I should think you ought to be able to with that imagination you're always talking of." But punishments are so horrid, and I like to imagine only pleasant things, said Anne, cuddling Davy. There's so many unpleasant things in the world already that there's no use in imagining any more. In the end, Davy was sent to bed as usual, there to remain until noon next day. He evidently did some thinking, for when Anne went up to her room a little later, she heard him calling her name softly. Going in, she found him sitting up in bed with his elbows on his knees and his chin propped on his hands. Anne, he said solemnly, is it wrong for everybody to tell Wop falsehoods? I want to know. Yes, indeed. Is it wrong for a grown-up person? Yes. Then, said Davy decidedly, Marilla is bad, for she tells them. And she's worse than me, for I didn't know it was wrong, but she does. Davy Keith, Marilla never told a story in her life, said Anne indignantly. She did so. She told me last Tuesday that something dreadful would happen to me if I didn't say my prayers every night, and I haven't said them for over a week, just to see what would happen, and nothing has, concluded Davy in an aggravated tone. Anne choked back a mad desire to laugh with the conviction that it would be fatal, and then earnestly set about saving Marilla's reputation. Why, Davy Keith, she said solemnly, something dreadful has happened to you this very day. Davy looked skeptical. I suppose you mean being sent to bed without any supper, he said scornfully. But that isn't dreadful. Course, I don't like it, but I've been sent to bed so much since I've come here that I'm getting used to it, and you don't save anything by making me go without supper either, for I always eat twice as much for breakfast. I don't mean you're being sent to bed. I mean the fact that you told a falsehood today. And Davy, Anne leaned over the footboard of the bed and shook her finger impressively at the culprit. For a boy to tell what isn't true is almost the worst thing that could happen to him. Almost the very worst. So you see, Marilla told you the truth. But I thought that something bad would be exciting, protested Davy in an injured tone. Marilla isn't to blame for what you thought. Bad things aren't always exciting. They're very often just nasty and stupid. It was awful funny to see Marilla and you looking down the well, though, said Davy, hugging his knees. Anne kept a sober face until she got downstairs, and then she collapsed on the sitting room lounge and laughed until her sides ached. I wish you'd tell me the joke, said Marilla, a little grimly. I haven't seen much to laugh at today. You'll laugh when you hear this, assured Anne, and Marilla did laugh, which showed how much her education had advanced since the adoption of Anne. But she sighed immediately afterwards. I suppose I shouldn't have told him that, although I heard a minister say it to a child once. But he did aggravate me so. It was that night you were at the Cromartie concert and I was putting him to bed. He said he didn't see the good of praying until he got big enough to be of some importance to God. And I did not know what we are going to do with that child. I never saw him beat. I'm feeling clean discouraged. Oh, don't say that, Marilla. Remember how bad I was when I came here? Anne, you were never that bad. Never. I see that now, when I've learned what real badness is. You were always getting into terrible scrapes, I'll admit. But your motive was always good. Davy is just bad from sheer love of it. Oh, no, I don't think it's the real badness with him either, pleaded Anne. It's just mischief, and it is rather quiet for him here, you know. He has no other boys to play with, and his mind has to have something to occupy it. Dora is so prim and proper she is no good for a boy's playmate. I really think it would be better to let him go to school, Marilla. No, said Marilla resolutely. My father always said that no child should be cooped up in the four walls of a school until it was 7 years old. And Mr. Allen says the same thing. The twins can have a few lessons at home, but go to school they shan't till they're 7. Well, we must try to reform Davy at home then, said Anne cheerfully. With all his faults, he's really a dear little chap. I can't help loving him, Marilla. It may be a dreadful thing to say, but honestly, I like Davy better than Dora, for all she's so good. I don't know, but that I do myself, confessed Marilla, and it isn't fair for Dora, isn't a bit of trouble. There couldn't be a better child, and you'd hardly know she was in the house. Dora is too good, said Anne. She behaves just as well as if there wasn't a soul to tell her what to do. She was born already brought up, so she doesn't need us. And I think, concluded Anne, hitting on a very vital truth, that we always love best the people who need us. Davy needs us badly. He certainly needs something, agreed Marilla. Rachel Lynde would say it was a good spanking. Chapter 11, Facts and Fancies. Teaching is really very interesting work, wrote Anne to a Queen's Academy chum. Jane says she thinks it's monotonous, but I don't find it so. Something funny is almost sure to happen every day, and the children say such amusing things. Jane says she punishes her pupil when they make funny speeches, which is probably why she finds teaching monotonous. This afternoon, little Jimmy Andrews was trying to spell speckled and couldn't manage it. Well, he said finally, I can't spell it, but I know what it means. What? I asked. St. Clair Donnell's face missed. St. Clair is certainly very much freckled, although I tried to prevent the others from commenting on it. For I was freckled once, and well, do I remember it. But I don't think St. Clair minds. It was because Jimmy called him St. Clair that St. Clair pounded him on the way home from school. I heard of the pounding, but not officially, so I don't think I'll take any notice of it. Yesterday I was trying to teach Lottie Wright to do addition. I said, if you had 3 candies in one hand and 2 in the other, how many would you have altogether? A mouthful, said Lottie. And in the nature study class, when I asked them to give me a good reason why toads should be killed, Benji Sloane gravely answered, because it would rain the next day. It's so hard not to laugh, Stella. I have to save up all my amusement until I get home, and Marilla says it makes her nervous to hear wild shrieks of mirth proceeding from the east gable without any apparent cause. She says a man in Grafton went insane once, and that was how it began. Did you know that Thomas A. Becket was canonized as a snake? Rose Bell says he was. Also that William Tyndale wrote the New Testament. Claude White says a glacier is a man who puts in window frames. I think the most difficult thing in teaching, as well as the most interesting, is to get the children to tell you their real thoughts about things. One stormy day last week, I gathered them around me at dinner hour and tried to get them to talk to me just as if I were one of themselves. I asked them to tell me the things they most wanted. Some of the answers were commonplace enough. Dolls, ponies, and skates. Others were decidedly original. Hester Bolter wanted to wear her Sunday dress every day and eat in the sitting room. Hannah Bell wanted to be good without having to take any trouble about it. Marjorie White, age 10, wanted to be a widow. Questioned why, she gravely said that if you weren't married, people called you an old maid. And if you were, your husband bossed you. But if you were a widow, there'd be no danger of either. The most remarkable wish was Sally Bell's. She wanted a honeymoon. I asked her if she knew what it was, and she said she thought it was an extra nice kind of bicycle because her cousin in Montreal went on a honeymoon when he was married, and he had always had the very latest in bicycles. Another day, I asked them all to tell me the naughtiest thing they'd ever done. I couldn't get the older ones to do so, but the third class answered quite freely. Eliza Bell had set fire to her aunt's carded rolls. Asked if she meant to do it, and she said, not altogether. She just tried a little end to see how it would burn, and the whole bundle blazed up in a jiffy. Emerson Gillis had spent 10 cents for candy when he should have put it in his missionary box. Annetta Bell's worst crime was eating some blueberries that grew in the graveyard. Willie White had slid down the sheep house roof a lot of times with his Sunday trousers on. But I was punished for it because I had to wear patch pants to Sunday school all summer. And when you're punished for a thing, you don't have to repent of it, declared Willie. I wish you could see some of their compositions. So much do I wish that I'll send you copies of some written recently. Last week I told the 4th class I wanted them to write me letters about anything they pleased, adding, by the way, a suggestion that they might tell me of some place that they had visited or some interesting things or persons they had seen. They were to write the letters on real notepaper, seal them in an envelope, and address them to me, all without any assistance from other people. Last Friday morning, I found a pile of letters on my desk, and that evening I realized afresh that teaching had its pleasures as well as its pains. Those compositions would atone for much. Here is Ned Clay's address, spelling and grammar as originally penned. Miss Teacher Shirley. So to help you better understand, my listeners, he wrote Miss, M-I-S-S, Teacher. Miss was with a capital M as it should be. Teacher, lowercase t, E-A-C-H-E-R, correctly spelled, just not capitalized. Shirley, capital S, lowercase h-I, capital R, lowercase l-e-y. Green Gables. Green spelled correctly and capitalized. Gables spelled correctly but not capitalized. P period E period island can birds. And just so you can get a visual, this is it here. Right there. All right. Dear teacher, I think I will write you a composition about birds. Birds is very useful animals. My cat catches birds. His name is William, but Paul calls him Tom. He is old striped and he got one of his ears froze off last winter. No E on froze. Only for that he would be a good-looking cat. My uncle, U-N-K-L-E, has adopted a cat. It come to his house one day and wouldn't go away. Wouldn't, W-O-U-D-E-N-T. And uncle, with a K, says it has forgot more than most people ever knowed. He lets it, he, not capitalized, sleep on his rocking chair, C-H-A-R-E, and my aunt says he thinks more of it than he does of his children. That is not right. We ought to be kind to cats and give them new milk, but we ought not to be better to them than to our children. That is all, O-L-L, I can think of, so no more at present from Edward Blake Clay. And this is how he signed his name. St. Clair Donnell's is as usual short and to the point. St. Clair never wastes words. I do not think he chose his subject or added the postscript out of malice aforethought. It's just that he is not a real deal of tact or imagination. Dear Miss Shirley, you told us to describe something strange we've seen. I will describe the Avonlea Hall. It is 2 doors, an inside one and an outside one. It has 6 windows and a chimney. It has 2 ends and 2 sides. It's painted blue. That is what makes it strange. It is built on the Lower Cromarty Road. It is the 3rd most important building in Avonlea. The others are the church and the blacksmith shop. They hold debating clubs and lectures in it and concerts. Yours truly, Jacob Donnell. P.S. The hall is a very bright blue. All of his punctuation and spelling were correct. Anita Bell's letter was quite long, which surprised me, for writing essays is not Annetta's forte, and hers are generally as brief as St. Clair's. Annetta is a quiet little puss and a model of good behavior, but there isn't a shadow of originality in her. Here is her letter. Dearest teacher, I think I'll write you a letter to tell you how much I love you. I love you with my whole heart and soul and mind, with all there is of me to love, and I want to serve you forever. It would be my highest privilege. That is why I try hard to be good in school and learn my lessons. You are so beautiful, my teacher. Your voice is like music, and your eyes are like pansies when the dew is on them. You are like a tall, stately queen. Your hair is like rippling gold. Anthony Pye says it is red, but you needn't pay any attention to Anthony. I have only known you for a few months, but I cannot realize that there was ever a time when I did not know you, when you had not come into my life to bless and hallow it. I will always look back to this year as the most wonderful in my life because it brought you to me. Besides, it's the year we moved to Avonlea from Newbridge. So far, that's the only misspelling in her letter. And it's not that it was spelled incorrectly, it just was not capitalized. Newbridge was not capitalized. My love for you has made my life very rich, and it has kept me from much of harm and evil. I owe this all to you, my sweetest teacher. I shall never forget how sweet you looked the last time I saw you in that black dress with flowers in your hair. I shall see you like that forever, even when we are both old and gray. You will always be young and fair to me, dearest teacher. I'm thinking of you all the time, in the morning, at the noontide, and at the twilight. I love you when you laugh and when you sigh, even when you look disdainful. I never saw you look cross, though Anthony Pye says you always look so, but I don't wonder you look cross at him, for he deserves it. I love you in every dress. You seem more adorable in each new dress than the last. Dearest teacher, good night. The sun has set and the stars are shining, stars that are as bright and beautiful as your eyes. I kiss your hands and face, my sweet. May God watch over you and protect you from all harm. Your affectionate pupil, Anita Bell. So other than not capitalizing Newbridge, the only word that she misspelled was affectionate, and she spelled it AFECKSIONATE. And here is your visual for that. This extraordinary letter puzzled me not a little. I knew Annetta couldn't have composed it any more than she could fly. When I went to school the next day, I took her for a walk down the brook at recess and asked her to tell me the truth about the letter. Annetta cried and fessed up freely. She said she had never written a letter and she didn't know how to or what to say, but there was a bundle of love letters in her mother's top bureau drawer which had been written to her by an old beau. It wasn't father, sobbed Annetta. It was someone who was studying for a minister, and so he could write lovely letters, but Ma didn't marry him after all. She said she couldn't make out what he was driving at half the time, but I thought the letters were sweet and that I'd just copy things out of them here and there to write you. I put teacher where he put lady, and I put in something of my own when I could think of it, and I changed some words. I put dress in place of mood. I didn't know just what a mood was, but I supposed it was something to wear. I didn't suppose you'd know the difference. I don't see how you found out it wasn't all mine. You must be awful clever, teacher. I told Annetta it was very wrong to copy another person's letter and pass it off as her own, but I'm afraid that all Annetta repented of was being found out. And I do love you, teacher, she sobbed. It was all true, even if the minister wrote it first. I do love you with all my heart. It's very difficult to scold anybody properly under such circumstances. Here is Barbara Shaw's letter. I can't reproduce the blots of the original. Dear teacher, you said we might write about a visit. I never visited but once. It was at my Aunt Mary's last winter. My Aunt Mary is a very particular woman and a great housekeeper. The first night I was there, we were at tea. I knocked over a jug and broke it. Aunt Mary said she had had that jug ever since she was married, and nobody had ever broken it before. When we got up, I stepped on her dress, and all the gathers tore out of the skirt. The next morning when I got up, I hit the pitcher against the basin and cracked them both, and I upset a cup of tea on the tablecloth at breakfast. When I was helping Aunt Mary with the dinner dishes, I dropped a china plate, and it smashed. That evening, I fell downstairs and sprained my ankle and had to stay in bed for a week. I heard Aunt Mary tell Uncle Joseph it was a mercy or I'd have broken everything in the house. When I got better, it was time to go home. I don't like visiting very much. I like going to school better, especially since I came to Avonlea. Yours respectfully, Barbara Shaw. Everything was spelled correctly. Willie White's began. Respected Miss, I want to tell you about my very brave aunt. She lives in Ontario, and one day she went out to the barn and saw a dog in the yard. The dog had no business there, so she got a stick and whacked him hard and drove him into the barn and shut him up. Pretty soon a man came looking for an imaginary lion. Query, did Willie mean a menagerie lion? That had run away from a circus, and it turned out that the dog was a lion, and my very brave aunt had drove him into the barn with a stick. It's a wonder she was not et up, but she was very brave. Emerson Gillis says if she thought it was a dog, she wasn't any braver than if it really was a dog. But Emerson is jealous because he hasn't got a brave aunt himself. Nothing but uncles. So in his letter, very brave and aunt were all capitalized every single time they were mentioned. The first word that he misspelled was drove him when she says, my very brave aunt drove him into the barn. Instead of D-R-O-V-E, he did D-R-U-V. And then when it says, it's a wonder she was not ate up, instead of ate, he said et, E-T. And that was it. Everything else was fine. She says, I've kept the very best for the last. You laugh at me because I think Paul is a genius, but I'm sure his letter will convince you that he is a very uncommon child. Paul lives away down near the shore with his grandmother, and he has no playmates. No real playmates. You remember our school management professor told us that we must not have favorites among our pupils, but I can't help loving Paul Irving the best of all mine. I don't think it does any harm, though, for everyone loves Paul, even Miss Lind, who says she could never have believed she'd get so fond of a Yankee. The other boys in school like him, too, and there is nothing weak or girlish about him in spite of his dreams and fancies. He is very manly and can hold his own in all games. He fought St. Clair Donnell recently because St. Clair said the Union Jack was away ahead of the Stars and Stripes as a flag. The result was a drawn battle and a mutual agreement to respect each other's patriotism henceforth. St. Clair says he can hit the hardest, but Paul can hit the oftenest. Here is Paul's letter. My dear teacher, you told us we might write you about some interesting people we knew. I think the most interesting people I know are my rock people, and I mean to tell you about them. I've never told anybody about them except Grandma and Father, but I would like to have you know about them because you understand things. There are a great many people who do not understand things, so there is no use in telling them. My rock people live at the shore. I used to visit them almost every evening before the winter came. Now I can't go till spring, but they will be there. For people like that never change. That is a splendid thing about them. Nora was the first one of them I got acquainted with, and so I think I love her the best. She lives in Andrews Cove, and she has black hair and black eyes, and she knows all about the mermaids and the water kelps. You ought to hear the stories she can tell. Then there are the twin sailors. They don't live anywhere, they sail all the time, but they often come ashore to talk to me. They are a pair of jolly tars, and they have been everything in the world. They have seen everything in the world, and more than what is in the world. Do you know what happened to the youngest twin sailor once? He was sailing, and he sailed right into a moon glade. A moon glade is the track the full moon makes on the water when it is rising from the sea. You know, teacher. Well, the youngest twin sailor sailed along the moon glade till he came right up to the moon, and there was a little golden door in the moon, and he opened it and sailed right through it. He had some wonderful adventures in the moon, but it would make this letter too long to tell them. Then there is the golden lady of the cave. One day, I found a big cave down on the shore, and I went away in, and after a while, I found the golden lady. She has golden hair right down to her feet, and her dress all glittering and glistening like gold that is alive. And she has a golden harp and plays on it all day long. You can hear the music any time along shore if you listen carefully, but most people would think it was only the wind among the rocks. I've never told Nora about the golden lady. I was afraid it might hurt her feelings. It even hurt her feelings if I talked too long with the twin sailors. I always met the twin sailors at the Stripe Rocks. The youngest twin sailor is very good-tempered, but the oldest twin sailor can look dreadfully fierce at times. I have my suspicions about the oldest twin. I believe he'd be a pirate if he dared. There's really something very mysterious about him. He swore once, and I told him if he ever did it again, he needn't come ashore to talk to me, because I promised Grandmother I'd never associate with anyone that swore. He was pretty well scared, I can tell you, and he said if I would forgive him, he would take me to the sunset. So the next evening when I was sitting on the striped rocks, the oldest twin came sailing over the sea in an enchanted boat, and I got in her. The boat was all pearly and rainbowy like the inside of the mussel shells, and her sail was like moonshine. Well, we sailed right across to the sunset. Think of that, teacher. I've been in the sunset. And what do you suppose it is? The sunset is a land of flowers, like a great garden, and the clouds are beds of flowers. We sailed into a great harbor, all the color of gold, and I stepped right out of the boat on a big meadow, all covered with buttercups as big as roses. I stayed there for ever so long. Excuse me. It seemed nearly a year, but the oldest twin says it was only a few minutes. You see, in the sunset land, the time is ever so much longer than it is here. Your loving pupil, Paul Irving. P.S. Of course, this letter isn't really true, teacher. And all of his spelling was correct and punctuation. Well, that is all for our adventure today with Once Upon a Storybook. Hope you enjoyed those 2 chapters. I know it was a little bit long today, but oh, what laughs we've shared today, and what great stories and letters and adventures. Until next time, my friends, be joyful, stay crafty in your own way, make your own joyful creations, and above everything else in this world, remember this: you are made of matter, therefore you matter. So go be your own exclamation. Mwah. Nugs and Joy. See you next week.